Well, today's Sunday, um, so it's a teaching day, and that topic is revisiting the pendulum. Here recently, I've talked about Pelham as a robust school of thought and practice. Here we are looking at how within our work we have precision. There are a number of different ways to see the pendulum as a tool. One of them is as a survival tool in a crisis. It can be accurate in terms of how in a crisis emotions can harm us, harm people around us, and the pendulum can point out how that happens. That's the pendulum as a survival tool. You know, if we can grab onto the pendulum and, oh God, I'm going into such a low, I'm going to be paralyzed, or I'm going into such a high, I could make mistakes. And in those situations, I think there's some, it's got both the quality of robust and precision. Another way of using the pendulum and linking it to memory links to hold up familiar training card. That one, and then the one that is simpler, useful to any audience. Another way of looking at the pendulum is if our pendulum is swinging and it swings frequently in patterns that are not useful to us, that links the pendulum to memory links. So the pendulum can be, which is a different function than the function of the pendulum in a crisis, but the pendulum can be a useful way to get into memory links. And I think I would say also a fairly safe way to get into our memory links. You know, if I swing around enthusiasm and at times ideals and goal setting that isn't very realistic, you know, overreaching. You know, so I've talked recently about how my Achilles heel is located in overreaching, and that's almost pendulum swings. So, you know, as I said, to start with, you know, the pendulum can back up a robust school of thought and practice with precision. And one of the usefulnesses of the pendulum is in crisis. And now I touched on how it can give us a direct link into memory links. But one I want to look at the pendulum today is as a tool that can give us, I think, can give us knowledge about how we are in the world. There's a certain place where what Pelon is a search for deep and practical self-knowledge. And then what do we do with the self-knowledge? And I wanted today to try and present the pendulum as a useful, even though at times rather brutally demanding mirror, okay? If we can get in touch with our pendulum swings. And if you remember, pendulum swings are most frequently unconscious and most frequently a struggle to be aware of them. But the other thing I want to do is so I want to sort of present the pendulum today as a mirror. Where is my pendulum? How am I in the world? And to try and achieve that self-knowledge and to look at my pendulum. Okay, I'm teaching you this material. Am I going to get wordy? Am I going to go off onto a tangent? Am I going to get high on that? Am I going to get into an enthusiastic reference to Rembrandt or a joke that only I understand? All of those are sort of part of my particular pattern of enthusiastic highs. But at the same time, I want to use today just to go over some sort of basic revision of the pendulum and give everyone a chance to ask fundamental questions. Well, what is it about? What's the purpose of it? What do you mean by this or that? And to come onto that, revisiting the basics, the pendulum, the purpose of the pendulum is a tool that can give us an understanding and a control over our emotions. Almost the sole aim of the pendulum is to expand the choices we have about what we're going to do with our feelings. I mean, that's the purpose of it. And to give a quick example of that, if we're in an extreme high, which is called a compulsive high, or an extreme low, which is called a compulsive low, we don't have choices about what we can do with our feelings. We're sort of driven. If I get compulsively high in teaching this, I won't have the control to think, okay, am I presenting the basic definitions clearly? I'll be off onto some sort of tangent. And that's interesting in terms of memory links, just to put that there, because I don't know how many times I taught the pendulum, probably thousands. So it's a little bit boring. So I want to get into something that's a bit interesting to me at this moment. So I'll sort of wiggle out of my responsibility to get across the basics and go into some new thing about how Joe Biden has an innate understanding of the pendulum because he now knows how to shut up, And that's not quite teaching what are the basics of the pendulum. That is my sort of high. And if that high goes all the way up, I'll just be into my need in that compulsive high. Or if someone's in a compulsive low, they'll just be into their need in the compulsive low. They won't have choices. The middle range of the pendulum that we call the tolerable area, the yellow, is where we have choices. You know, okay, I could go on to my rift about Joe Biden, or I could not. But and that's the yellow area. When I'm in the red area, the compulsive fly, I don't have that choice. I'm driven by my own enthusiasm. And we talk about the compulsive high and the compulsive low. We are in a bubble of our own emotions. We can kid ourselves that we have a wider awareness than that, but in fact we don't. And so just defining the compulsive high and the compulsive low for a moment, it is a time when we're sort of enthralled by our own emotions, or captured by them, imprisoned by them. We don't have choices. The high side of the pendulum can be pleasant or unpleasant, and they're jargon words. The words high, low, calm, pleasant, unpleasant are jargon words within our theory of the pendulum. They have particular meanings. So a pleasant high isn't a good high, because a pleasant high can be the high from heroin, it can be the high of criminality, the pleasant high can be the high of the rapist, because the person is feeling pleasure. The unpleasant high is anger, embarrassment, jealousy, and they can be very useful things. You know, a brief high of explosive anger, compulsive anger, can be very useful in common sense, blowing off steam. One of the things as we get further into the use of this tool, there's a particular way of using highs, of being able to, both pleasant and unpleasant, you know, high enthusiasm, which I can get into, or a high of anger, being able to go up there briefly and have it, get it out, and then come down. And so there is the way we use the word compulsive, we mean it in the sense of not having choices. The compulsive high, the compulsive low, we don't have choices. The pleasant and compulsive, the pleasant and unpleasant on the low side of the pendulum are more, they're slightly harder to, they're harder to distinguish, just put it that simply. I mean, there's a large difference between a compulsive high of being terrorized by fear and a compulsive high of falling in love. Those differences are pretty easy to see. On the low side, I'm talking about the extremes now, the compulsive side of the pendulum. On the low side, the pleasant compulsive low is the unpleasant compulsive low is guilt. You know, what's in the medical world called depression. And that is inwardly, obviously self-destructive. The martyrdom and self-indulgence of the pleasant compulsive low is a bit harder to see. What we're talking about in the pendulum is the movement of our emotions. And this is a place, and that's the hardest thing to get about the pendulum. The hardest thing to get about the pendulum is the first bit. After that, it all sort of falls into place. But it's not about high or low energy. It's about how our emotions are moving and if we have choices about that movement. That point is quite subtle. I think we're talking about the pendulum, we're revising it, we're going over some basics about the pendulum. I talked earlier about how the pendulum provides some precision to our robust school of thought and practice. I talked about it being a good survival tool. And what I want to look at today, after I've just revised some of the basics, is how it can be a particular challenging mirror to how we are in the world. But coming back to where we are here, the main thing to get, I guess, in terms of understanding a definition and the purpose of the pendulum, it is about how our emotions are moving. The high side, I've just talked about the compulsive high. The high side, in a sense, is physical. In a rough brush approach, it's sort of extrovert. It's the part of us that wants to reach out in the world and engage, whether that engagement is nourishing or destructive, but we still want to be out there. I talk about the high side of the pendulum being, we see a lovely sunset and we want somebody else to share it with. And we want to get into all that. Yeah, a compulsive high around nature, the beauty of nature, can be very pleasant and pretty nourishing. And that gets us, I will touch on in a moment, the positive side of the compulsive highs and the compulsive lows. We're putting that aside for a moment. So it's about the movement of our emotions. And one of the major there's a couple of major contributions about the pendulum to the field, I believe. One is the relationship between the highs and the lows. On one level, that's common sense, but in another way, it has a precise originality to our school of thought and practice. Because if I can use this, I'll try an example that I haven't used before. But a Pellan physician, before and there are Pellan physicians out there, people who've trained with us. A Pellan physician, before providing antidepressants, would see, is there a pattern that this depression is coming from highs? And if we could cut out the highs, would the depression possibly go away? Because, going back to the diagram and coming into the yellow area, and so, as I said earlier, one of the big purposes of the pendulum is to give ourselves choices about what we want to do with our feelings, give ourselves choices about what we want to do with our emotional reactions to situations. Now, and we are saying that a lot of depression is caused by highs. So if you could cut out the highs, you're going to cut out the depression. That's a pretty big statement. We're not saying that's always the case. But with that statement, one of the things we're saying in the pendulum, it is not necessarily the content that is causing, to use that language, the mental illness. It is the process by which someone has a habit of getting frequently very high and then hitting lows that are, I mean, there are certain people, I'll try and watch my pendulum. But, you know, there are certain people I have thought, you know, pop stars who, you know, don't make it. Janis Joplin, I felt I could have saved her life. Cynthia.
Back to the whole content thing, and it's a question that I was thinking about the whole time. What do you do in terms of the pendulum, in terms of, I don't know, emotions that are natural in the circumstances, and socially, if you didn't have these emotions, people would, like, you get a friend who's sick and the sadness that comes from that, or grieving for someone, or even being happy about getting something. I mean, I know maybe it has to do with keeping it in the tolerable and there being choices, but I mean, if you were to be in the calm all of the time and not express emotion, people would think there was something wrong with you and it would be a problem for you. I mean, and I think in general, I think there are certain things that, I don't know, that should either make you happy or upset. And if it doesn't, that, you know, there's, I mean, you know, there's a certain range of being human that I mean, you know, and in fact, one of the things that's sort of related that I've noticed about myself, if I'm angry and I'm high, I mean, I am, and I used to have bad compulsive highs with anger, but they've stopped, which is really good. I had some spiritual work done, but I've noticed if I'm high on angry, it's actually I can be very angry in a or I don't know, I might not be a calm, but you know, there's a certain type of almost like cold anger. If somebody like really hurts you, particularly if somebody's hurt you or betrayed you or something, and where, I mean, I've never done anything on that and stuff, but well, except for, you know, when I get into that anger, I don't, that coldness, you know, I don't want, you know, there's a certain part where I don't want a relationship with that person anymore, or, you know, I don't want contact. Sometimes it goes away and sometimes, you know, I warm up again. But to me, but maybe that's a decision. Maybe that is a decision in the calm. I don't know. So that I just threw a lot in there, but.
No, thank you for that. Those points are of crucial importance. Okay. There's a certain history of this work where we probably, you know, it started what used to be called juvenile delinquents, you know, substance abuse, work in prisons. So there's a certain bias in the work that, oh my God, the compulsive highs are really dangerous. Okay. And that's just a bias because of the history. Okay. Yeah, I guess if someone spent their whole life working with gangs in LA, you know, they'd perhaps, to use our terminology, have a heightened awareness of the danger of compulsive highs. Okay. Just because of the content, you know, goes with the territory, right? There is, in another way, and you know, your question is so important. There's nothing in the pendulum theory. There's nothing in Pelham that says the calm is a better place than the compulsive high. It just isn't. You know, we're not saying that. We're saying it's a tool. Just the same. To use another quick example, there's nothing in Pelham that says the best combination of the life forces is an equal balance amongst all three, okay? A third. There's nothing in there. and that I like that particular example, because if you take that example, then Michelangelo's life was a mess. That's a bit hard to say, okay? Being productive when he was almost my age and still creating. Yeah. So in a similar way, it's a tool. And I have certainly worked with people who come from different places, and sort of adore the calm. That's the best place in the world. The whole world would be a better place if everyone was there, centered. That's nonsense. There's no evidence of that. It has its place, but I work with people who spent, and I think it's what you're saying, life comes in, right? Who spend a great deal of time being in the calm and knowing the calm, and then life intrudes, a car accident that kills their spouse or something, they fall apart. Because they swing out of the calm, and it's like, it's like being alone in a raging sea for them. So again, it's a tool. How do you use it in that situation? There's not a formula that predicts. I mean, we have the prediction: if you get high, you're going to get low, but that's just part of our theory. And the point I make about, depression, and, I just sort of go arbitrary. I don't have any evidence of this, but I make a strong statement. About half of it is content, and about half of it is pendulum swings. And if you bring in, just to expand this out a little bit, but I won't take it too far, but if you bring in feelings of accomplishment there, about half of it is certainly pendulum swings that don't have feelings of accomplishment. That, by the way, is a definition, not quite the right word, that is a description, maybe I'll use the word, of substance abuse. A whole lot of pendulum swings without feelings of accomplishment. And at that point, we say it's not the content, it's the process. And when I was saying, my hypothetical Pelham physician is going to do that first before prescribing the depressants, okay? But then you find out, no, there aren't highs that are causing this depression. This depression is something real in itself. And then medication can be a really good idea. But I guess that's where I talk about the robustness and the precision of this approach. You can pin that down. I mean, put me on a, series of work engagements that include travel, and, I'll get as high as a kite. I'll come down, and, I'll invent, because one of the things we do in the extreme low is we invent problems. We massage them, we focus on them, we cut out anything that might help us there. Like one of the things we will almost always do in the compulsive low, and it's a tip off to the compulsive low, we'll have 101 reasons why the things that would give us true rest aren't possible. Come on, Peter, you're probably a bit low. What about going to the swimming pool? Oh no, it's going to be full of kids. What about going for a walk in the park? No, it's going to be muddy. I mean, we will literally sabotage someone trying to get us into true rest. It's almost a tip off of the compulsive low. And as I said, the high in sort of broad brushstroke is extrovert, the low broad brushstroke is mental, introvert. The lows can be much longer than the highs. Lows can go on for a very, very long time. One of the ways that this has been useful is in institutional settings where people hit very big lows and then they have a high. This can also be true of foster kids, teenagers who are foster kids. There's got some real applications to teenage depression. And then, get a totally unrealistic expectation about an anticipated visit by, mum or dad, or an anticipated business visit. Someone's having time in a prison, and then the visit doesn't happen or goes wrong, and then that sort of swing up to the high of hope and then coming down the lows even longer. So I wonder, it's a lifelong study. It doesn't have any formulas in it. We're not saying, at times I guess there's a certain presentation of the material and even a use of the tools, and those of us who like them. It's a bit like the truth line. That is our bottom line. We've only got a small part of the truth. But when we're actually into it, we're communicating something different. We're communicating a belief in the material, a belief. We're not sort of qualifying it. So at times it can come across if it's got these sort of biases, but it doesn't have it as just a tool. It's neutral. It's neutral. And people can, one of the ways we talk about the calm of the pendulum, and that's a very positive place. The code of negative around the positive, these two little diagrams, the code of negative around the positive and the code of positive around the negative. They're really important in terms of the pendulum. And I think you touched on this, Cynthia. The code of negative around the positive of the calm is someone can miss out on life, really miss out. If you want to have a successful political career, the calm's a really useful place to be able to visit at times, but you can't spend too much time there. Your ambitions might be absolutely unrealistic. You've got a weird name, you've got big ears, and all you got going for you is that you make great speeches. Barack Obama spent too much time in the calm, and he's pretty good. His pendulum pretty healthy. You can see that. But the calm could be a dangerous place for someone like that. The risk is not worth it. Plus, if you add to that, asking the insurance company about what's the cost of being killed if you get elected, if you win, the calm can not calm's a bit dangerous there. You got to be able to have a certain sort of controlled high to take the risk. So the code of positive around the compulsive high is very clear. It gives us a vision of what we're capable of, and it can give us a vision and a commitment to risks we're prepared to take. And you don't get that anywhere else but from a big high. You're not this, slightly, slightly under slightly together kid he's got all these skills, including social skills, literary skills, but it's still sort of a bit untogether. We don't dream of being president of the United States from the calm of the pendulum. Okay, that's not how life goes. So there's a vision of our capability we can only have if we're prepared to have big eyes. And on the low side, and this is where I feel we've got something to offer, there's a sense, because on the low side, we talk about what you've got to do is sit it out. Don't come out of it too fast. If you come out of the low fast, even you come out of it cleverly with feelings of accomplishment, purpose, and contribution from hurt, roll them all out. But if you come out of the low too fast, you're going to miss the calm. The danger of going up to a compulsive high, which is just going to reinforce the low. You've got to come out of it slowly. And there's a certain sense of resignation, as I've said here at other times. It's something I just learned. It was just experience. It wasn't anything else. Guys serving time, and the ones who'd say, I don't think I did that much wrong. The whole world's full of dishonest corruption, but I'm tired of it. I'm just tired of it. I learned over time that that's an indication that someone who really might make it. And the other person, I'm going to get out. I'm not going to see those old friends before. I'm going to go to meetings, a lot of, 7 weeks later, they're back inside. And I just sort of studied that phenomenon, and I really learned, and I know it. I've seen it since over what is now a not short career. There's a certain sense of, I'm tired of that. There's a certain sense of, okay, I'm resigned, I'm sad, but I want something different. It's a certain sort of quiet voice. And I think you can only find that quiet voice in sitting out a deep low. It doesn't mean it's someone sitting out the deep low and is sort of thinking, oh, I will sit out this deep low. That will be good for me. Painful as all hell. And I guess it's got obvious parallels to really going through grief rather than denying grief. And then taking the lessons that, God or nature or mankind, humankind managed to achieve from grief. So it's a simple tool that has very sophisticated answers for complex situations. And it can, if we sort of look at our own pendulum, where am I? Where is my pendulum today? Where was my pendulum yesterday? What are the patterns of my pendulum? And then if we can add to that, this is where I talk about it as a demanding mirror, then how can I look at my pendulum and have a sense of how my feelings are affecting other people? That's the mirror. And a slogan of our work, and I guess it's a slogan of our work, but it's also a challenge to my profession that we need to be prepared to look in the mirror before we glance out the window and walk out the door. In other words, we have to take the challenge of knowing ourselves before we're pleased with the contributions we can make to other people. Someone would you like to come in tomorrow with any comments or questions?
I had many thoughts and questions, and they've all escaped me. Let me see. I was thinking about emotion and feeling not being possible in the high or low, but that there's a lot of false emotion in the compulsive high or the compulsive low. There's what appears to be a show in my family. I always thought of my family as not censoring themselves, or that being in touch with feelings, but it was really just more, what did you say? A bubble of emotion. You're being in the bubble that's not connected to anything that could be grieving or that could be integrated later. So I can see that being true. And it is family trait of depression, being quite horrible. And then there's a lot of the high, which is shooting out of that, but it can also be, I think it's interesting that there's a rageaholic as an idea that what feels good, I mean, I don't think of it as pleasure, but relief from the underlying feeling, so that there's a blessed kind of a numbness that comes in, or a diversion from whatever it is that's actually scaring or causing sadness, and that is tragically missed in what feels like more obvious expressions of affect, So it seems like in the calm, it's possible to have appropriate feeling and to feel that feeling because you're in safety, and stay in connection to oneself and be reachable, relatable, that there's possibility of sharing with another person. And that's the only place where it's interesting. It's drama, as the kids say, in either of the high or low places. It looks interesting until you realize how incredibly boring it is, because it's just not connected to anything that's going on the inside, but it's impossible to connect with a person. I mean, there's really, the thing about empathy, I mean, I work a lot with depression, is that there can be a shift, but I think it's not joining in the stories and in the wallowing and in the belief systems that come out in the compulsive low, but that in either place it's harder with anger, but I know that with depression, just presence and keeping that person company and being curious about what it looks like and feels like from where they are, but not engaging in the belief in the, in the story, but being curious to know everything that, how it feels to be stuck in that story. I've noticed that the story, the beliefs, and the being married to the stuff that's pulling that person down can start to almost break up. And I can find that we might be actually more in the calm. And I'll know that because we'll be in relationship. And it's just like almost sitting on a bus stop with that person and looking out and seeing through their eyes and not judging. And then there's a matching that happens energetically that can bring both of us into a place of just being curious and witnessing and not judging. And somehow the pull of getting into the extreme of that low is less. So that was what I was thinking when you were talking earlier. And it hadn't occurred to me that, with the DSM, there's a lot of diagnosis that says, okay, you're either bipolar if you've ever swung up high, or else you have major depressive episodes. So you have major depression, depressive disorder, and how you're medicated is different. And it's like, wow, I can't believe that we have bipolar or major depressive disorder without looking at the pendulum. So probably all of that was on mute. Oh no, it wasn't. Good. Thankfully
No, we
not.
heard it all.
It's
You're
good.
on mute.
I have a thought.
Yes, Elizabeth.
Well, I would add maybe a little nuance to the idea that emotions experienced in the extreme swings of the pendulum are false, because sometimes in an abrupt high or a deep low, I have had moments of clarity. The difference is that these true moments of clarity in a swing will keep to be thought over when you're back in the cold, and that's why I try not to make any decisions in a big swing, because whatever I'm experiencing, if it's real, it will keep it. You can't see, but I'm like swinging. When I'm back in the calm, I'll be able to look at it again, like the behavior I'm experiencing from this person in this relationship is unacceptable and needs to change, or the relationship needs to end. I've experienced that in a big high, but it was still true when I was cold. So, I think that's almost the slogan, is it will keep.
Yeah, Cynthia.
I get it, but sometimes I think you almost need to, even if you've made the decision, particularly, well, I have a hard time with relationships um, and like, especially in
Your
high.
volume's a
Oh,
little bit.
oh, I'm sorry. That's because my voice probably got lower because this is something that gets me very nervous. Sometimes I actually need a high, even if, and this is right, Elizabeth is right about not making a decision from the extremes, but sometimes you actually need the high to act on the decision from the calm, particularly if it's something as scary as sending boundaries in a relationship. you know I honestly probably can't do it well, I don't do it well in any state of emotion, but that's, sometimes, although when you're in a high, you never do it well anyway. So I'm still working on that one. So
Yeah, no, a couple of things. A couple of things here. Our material on relationships is marriage is a conventional word. It's very, very clear. It's in the manual, and it's straight David Palin, and he talked about love, sex, and affection being essentially volatile and changeable. Therefore, they are not that which a relationship can be based on, but what can cement a relationship over time is communication and refuge. And communication is A, talking to someone like we can't talk to anyone else, but B, at times, and I think this is where you're right about the pendulum, deep communication in a relationship means at times communicating on such a level that it seems the relationship is not going to work. Okay. So it's sort of saying everything. And just sort of saying this material quickly. And a refuge is a place where we can just be ourselves, where we don't need to prove anything. The whole concept of refuge has got a whole lot of resonance in this work. And on decisions, my book on decisions, which I'm still working on, I sort of say in there because decisions are mysterious. Okay, we make a good decision. I've said this here before. I know I'm repeating a bit. Passive listen to good advisors and receiving hard feedback and doing all the right Pelham DIY things about a decision, and over time the decision ends up not being a good one. Okay, and some other decision that someone made that looked wonky ends up being full of wisdom. There's mystery about decisions, as there's mystery about life. Okay, but in that, I'm saying that sometimes, good decisions, quote unquote, are made from extreme high in the extreme high of the extreme low. It's just a fact. In the main, what we, the company line, if I can use that phrase, if you've got a decision to make, check out how you feel about it in the high, in the low, and in the middle. It won't guarantee good decisions, but it's a pretty strong guarantee of not hitting disaster. Okay, but and again, it's a tool. It's a tool to bring in, and sort of use it how we can. Going back to, the almost the truth or falsity in the in the compulsive high and the compulsive low. That's a really complex one, because there is no doubt we can get a lot of falsity, and we can have a story about falsity. I mean, it's not the case for me now, but particularly if I was going through rejection, I had a ability to get into a hope high, okay, real pleasant hope high that was real dangerous. You know, and one of them, when my first marriage broke up, and I was running a program in Italy, and I can't even know why, but I was just going to get in the car and drive to Germany. I don't know why. Can't even remember. And my friend just took both sets of keys and said, "Peter, I'm not giving them to you." Just that simple. And I used to call them moonlight walks, okay? Because I'd go on a moonlight walk, and in my head, I'd sort of paint some life, you know, that was going to be marvelous, and I could achieve it, and you know, no one knows how, you know, prepared I am to go after it. And it was nonsense. You know, some of it was just crap, and then some of it's real. You know, so it's not. I guess probably methodologically, and we probably, Nikki, do it, and Mary do it sort of intuitively, but I think it probably needs to be stated more. They are interlocking tools, okay? You know, it's not one tool, and at times you need to bring in the others, whatever they are. You know, remember your purpose, or you know, you're splashing into your, I mean, I won't do it anymore because I'm 87, but I grew up in Australia. I'm a really good swimmer, and I can swim out so far everyone's really worried, okay, because they can't see me anymore. And, you know, there's a particular sort of high, okay? And am I going to get high and be this healthy, you know, 17-year-old Australian surfer at 87? You know, I'll die. And that happens. It happens a lot in Canada, where people who, it's men, you know, who have played hockey, and then they're around a rink, they put on some skates, and they go out and they play, and they have a heart attack and they're gone because they're not fit for it anymore. It's, you know, it's not an infrequent thing in Canada, someone doing that. And that, you know, that's a real pendulum swing. I'm sure that, well, it's like me, you know, I dive in the water, I feel it, I know what it feels like, I'll just go out there. Someone puts on skates, and it's memory links, isn't it? There's all those positive memory links come in, because I can't skate, and I've never played hockey. But, you know, they put on the skates, they can move on the ice, all those positive memory links come in, the pendulum goes up, and I guess they stay on the ice, I don't know, for 30 minutes when they should have been there for 5. So there are false narratives for sure in those places, and there are authentic narratives in those places as well. And I guess that's where we need the interlocking tools. That's where we need to bring some of the other stuff in. To me, and you know, I just happen to love him. But the real sort of proof of the place of the highs and the place of the calm Because the calm, by the way, going right back to our beginning, the calm is the place where we have the greatest choice about what we're going to do with our emotions. At times we have such a wide choice, and we can see all sides of different situations that we become sort of paralyzed. You know, that's where the calm of the pendulum is not to be romanticized. But you know, Van Gogh, Van Gogh's paintings and then Van Gogh's letters. You know, if you read his letters, and he left letters more than any other artist in history. That's true. You can see the work was in and around the calm. The vision was in the high. There's a question. So it's the sort of combination of those. And that's where I think it's, you know, my hat off to David Pellin. You know, he created something of enormous subtlety in this. Very powerful. And powerful as a mirror. You know, what's my pendulum like?
Peter, I have to leave because I have something starting at 3 that I have to get ready for.
That's thank you for coming.
Huh?
Did it sound familiar?
I'm sorry. Does what sound familiar?
The material.
Oh, yeah, but I'm thinking of it in a new way to applying it now in my life.
Oh, thank you. That's
Okay.
nice.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Okay. So talk to you. See you all Sunday.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So in the title you gave us, you said, how do we come out of COVID at our best? I wondered if...
Sorry, I missed that, Mary. My fault. That will be the title for next Sunday now. Okay, we'll repeat it. So this has been a revision of the pendulum, deliberately leading up to how does it apply to coming out of COVID. Yeah. I guess probably one use of the pendulum, if you're going to bullshit, don't do it from a high, because people will see you through it. You've got to be a bit cagey about it. Yeah, I'm sorry I forgot the title, my fault. But we'll have the title for next week. And this, I did want to do the revision anyway, that's real. Do you want to come in at all, Nikki, on Pendulum?
Hi. It's actually a long time since I've heard all that stuff, because I just hear the simple, because I'm, you know, it's just like assumed, the rest is assumed, I guess. So I haven't thought of that bigger stuff for a long time. Yeah. And bigger stuff for a long time, and why I suddenly went, yeah, then is like, oh yeah, therefore I'm just trying to apply it to myself. I'm out of date with myself. So I'm like, oh, I don't know what to think at the moment about some of it in relation to me, kind of thing. So, yeah, that's just my thought for now. Thank you.
No, I appreciate you saying that, because I guess the reason I did want to do, you know, really thorough sort of back to basics on the pendulum. And we can do that a bit on Wednesday when we're looking at examples. To be absolutely frank, I've got a bit lazy about teaching it. You know, I've done it so often, and it's a really good use of understanding of feelings of accomplishment. Okay, if I teach the pendulum really, really well, that's a good accomplishment. There are hardly any feelings of accomplishment in it for me, because I've done it so often. yeah, so, you know, I haven't presented it in its fullness enough recently. I mean, some recent years, you know, decade or two, and not, you know, not particularly pleased with that. But I sort of realized that was a fact. That's why I wanted to get the definitions across really, really clearly. I guess the other thing is clear up any misunderstandings. You know, compulsive highs are bad. The calm's good. No, there's nothing about that in the theory at all. Cynthia.
Well, one of the things I was thinking about was sort of like where I was sharing before, and I finally got clear. There are like certain things that whether I can do them or that even thinking about them is going to send me into a high, like I was talking about, you know, like thinking about, and actually a lot of times I just avoid it. My spouse did last time, like with the internet coming down. I mean, I can do it online, but talking to a person to get them to fix it. I mean, just thinking about doing it, I start getting all nervous and scared. And sometimes I need the high to say, all right, let's just do it, get it done with, you know, but you know, in this case I could avoid it, and you know, it turned out great and I didn't have to deal with it, which was even better. But yeah, I mean, because you're talking about like the situation and content, but there's certain content that, you know, unless I do a whole lot of work, and maybe not even then, is going to, it's just going to probably memory links, or just, you know, my nature, not, you know, there's only a part of me who can deal with confrontation, and that part tends to be at a higher energy level than the rest of me. But you know, in those kind of situations, you know, I could say focus on the process, but you know, if that content wasn't there, I would be just calm. You know, if I did not have to talk to somebody about getting something fixed, I would be calm. You know, and even the calm, I know I have to talk, you know, this needs to get done, but you know, there's a whole lot of anxiety that comes along with that. I mean, so I mean, maybe I should have waited that for examples, but I guess that's more of a question. What do you do with things like that?
Well, you know, half of it is content, and certainly when we're looking at COVID next week, next Sunday, that would be, you know, that's content. Memory links are content. Okay, I'm not taking content out. I guess almost out of pride, I often talk about how we've got something to offer because we can see when content is not relevant, which also means that medication may not be a good idea. That's a big statement. You know, understanding the pendulum, and this has been Mary's contribution over a whole bunch of years, understanding just the pendulum and feelings of accomplishment is a substitute for medication in a lot of situations, in our opinion. Okay, just that. In the field, that's a big statement. Okay, surprisingly big statement. So we wouldn't want to take it, and perhaps even now, sometimes when I talk about it, I'm not perhaps bringing the most ordinary thing when, you know, Elizabeth was saying that bad decisions we can make in highs. And, you know, that's absolutely true. You know, probably most bad decisions, this, you know, rough statement, but probably most bad decisions are decisions that are made in the high of the pendulum. They're probably true. From war to divorce to bankruptcy. There are three examples I've used in a lot of my writing. yeah, if you look at bad decisions made in those three areas of life, you know, they're about highs. They're about compulsive highs, the bad decision. And certainly, I think the bad decisions are also almost sort of rooted in denial of the calm, and particularly a denial of passive listening, you know, a denial of really listening to the opposition. You know, what are the Palestinians trying to say? What are the Israelis trying to say? And, you know, I think it's from a whole lot of situations that they're not going to listen to each other. And that is almost a denial, I guess, in terms of Pelham terms, on an informed, you know, someone who knows their way around Pelham, you know, the denial of passive listening. Because there's nothing in passive listening, just the same as there's nothing in the pendulum that says the calm is good and the high is bad. There's nothing in passive listening that says I'll passive listen to you and agree with you. But first I'll passive listen to you before I disagree with you. And you know, passive listening takes time. You know, it takes weeks, months, years at times to listen to somebody. You will, you know, known that, Cynthia, know your experiences as a divorce lawyer. You know, two people who were trying over a whole bunch of time to exchange two simple messages, and it doesn't happen.
Actually, there was an example of a case. It was actually, I only did a little work. It was my boss who the client was. The divorce went on for 7 years, whatever, and they actually had a divorce. They were in post-decree litigation over the children, because that could go on forever. And they went into mediation, and then they got, and then they ended up marrying. They said, you know, if we had talked to each other the way we did in mediation, we would never got married. And in fact, there was one of the early in my mediation class, one of my the exercises was had to do with two sisters fighting over an orange. And they were fighting who should get the orange, who should get the orange. And as they were talking, they find out that one person wanted to make, I think, a pie or something that you use the outside, and one wanted to make juice. So then they were able to get together and share it. One got all the, you know, got the inside, and one got the thing. And that was like, you know, one of the first things you're supposed to look for when you're doing. Well, I guess a lot of mediation is first the mediator passive listening, and then getting the other two to passive listen to each other, and then see if after that you can come up with a solution that, if at all possible, makes everybody happy, and if not, that everybody can live with.
Yeah, and that's, you know, one of the ways to see the pendulum, and I think to see it clearly, is notice what we call the pendulum is someone else is doing really good, really well. They're doing really well. They don't have, you know, they've never heard of Pelham, never heard of the pendulum, but they demonstrate the strength of what we've got in the pendulum, because they're acting in a way that I guess confirms our theory. Yeah, if you look at Barack Obama and his obvious, you know, pendulum understanding and pendulum control, and then you look at the fact that I think is going to emerge in history, as major, although, you know, it's hardly talked about very much, there were no scandals. I mean, that's extraordinary. There were no scandals. And even if someone says, even if someone can find one or two, almost prove the point. Now you've got to look for them, and they're fairly minor, but there are no scandals. And I think that's someone who's obviously making a lot of good decisions, because he must have, you know, there's going to be corruption in those high places, and he must have, and people around him, somebody must have headed it off. And that comes from the middle of the pendulum, for sure. But I think it confirms some of the pendulum. Because I guess someone like him would have a sort of white hot moment of anger. Yeah, how did he handle birtherism? You know, there are people saying over and over again, you're not really the president because, you know, you were born in Nigeria and wherever. You know, he did not get provoked. But inside, I'm sure he had a great, you know, he had his pendulum swings, that's for sure. He's human. But his decisions and his actions were obviously around the current.
Well, that made astrologers happy, actually, because then we got his birth time. Because there was all sorts of speculation about that. And then they put the birth. It's like, all right, there's birth certificates out. We can see it and we know his birth time. And then everybody was talking about his chart. but, you know, that's a different way of looking at it.
And, you know, I think the theme, I guess I'll still develop because it's sort of a bit new. You know, the pendulum as a mirror. And there are photographs, you know, the photographs of him looking in a mirror. And I guess he must have looked at his own pendulum swings. He must have. And he's got his wife and kids, and they would have been commenting on all that. Okay, so we will do the pendulum coming out of COVID next week, next Sunday. And yeah, if you could bring examples on Wednesday, almost the pendulum you see in other people, as well as the pendulum you see in yourself. Or not just in that, or other people in media or in film or in novels. Yeah, so we get at I guess I would like to get at the sort of literary and cinematic sort of examples that we can use to increase our understanding of the tool. That's what I want to say. Yeah. Okay. Well, bye-bye for now, and thank you for coming. And watch this space. Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Oh, we've got to do the